They say war changes everyone who touches it. That nobody prepared me for what happens when you fight alongside the species that shouldn't exist. Humans were supposed to be extinct, wiped out by the Dominion's cleansing fleets 3 cycles ago. Yet here I was, a battle-scarred Zilani warrior, watching these impossible creatures do things that defied every law of combat physics and sanity I'd ever known. My name is Kethvar, and I was a weapon before I met them. Forged by war, sharpened by loss, perfected by hate. I thought I understood violence. I thought I knew what it meant to fight for survival. I was wrong about everything. This is the story of how the dead taught the living what it truly means to never surrender. This is how humanity's refusal to die reshaped not just the war, but the very core of who I believed myself to be. And this is why the galaxy will never be the same again. The transport ship's hull groaned as we dropped out of hyperspace, and I felt that familiar twist in my stomach that came before every mission. 3 years of fighting the Dominion had taught me to recognize the signs. The way my secondary hearts started beating faster, the way my claws extended slightly without conscious thought, the way the world seemed to sharpen around the edges. But this mission was different. Even through my combat conditioning, I could sense the wrongness of it all. "Listen up, soldiers!" Commander Vextal's voice crackled through the ship's communication system, his usual bark carrying an undertone I'd never heard before. "Uncertainty. 442B. Intelligence suggests Dominion forces have established a forward operating base there." I shifted in my restraint harness, feeling the familiar weight of my plasma rifle against my chest. Around me, my squad mates, all seasoned Zilani warriors like myself, checked their weapons with practiced efficiency. We'd done this dance hundreds of times before. Drop in, eliminate the threat, secure the objective, extract. "What's the catch, Commander?" Sergeant Yixler asked, her scarred mandibles clicking with suspicion. Yix had been fighting longer than any of us, and her instincts were rarely wrong. The pause that followed was telling. "The beacon, it's not from one of our allied species." Every warrior in the transport bay went still. In 3 years of war, we'd seen distress calls from dozens of species, Aqualands, crystalline collective members, even the occasional hive mind unit that had broken free from Dominion control. But never from anyone new. The galaxy's inhabited systems were well documented, and everyone had already chosen sides in this war. "Then who?" I found myself asking, my voice rougher than I intended. "The beacon signature matches no known technology in our databases," Commander Vextal replied. "But the message itself, it's in standard galactic. Whoever sent it knows our languages, our protocols. They're asking specifically for military assistance against Dominion ground forces." The transport shuddered as we entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small viewport near my position, I could see Kepler, 442b spreading out below us. A world of brown continents and blue-green oceans. Not unlike my own homeworld before the Dominion glassed it.
"Could be a trap," muttered Jorik, the youngest member of our squad.
His tusks were still relatively small, marking him as barely past his first molting. Dominion's been getting creative with their psychological warfare. "Could be," the commander agreed. "But intelligence intercepts suggest they're just as confused as we are. Whatever's happening down there, it's not part of their plan either." The dropship bay's warning lights began flashing red, indicating we were approaching the landing zone. I ran through my pre-combat checklist one final time. Plasma rifle charged, backup energy cells secured, medkit attached to my belt, combat knife sharp enough to slice through Dominion armor plating. 30 seconds to drop, came the pilot's voice. That's when we heard it, a sound that would haunt my dreams for cycles to come. It started as a low rumble transmitted through the ship's hull, but as we descended, it became clearer. Explosions. Not the clean, precise detonations of Dominion plasma artillery, but something rougher, more primal. And underneath it all, a sound I couldn't immediately identify, like the battle cries of some unknown species. "What in the void is that?" E. Ixler whispered. The bay doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and we rappelled down through smoke and chaos. The first thing that hit me was the smell, not just cordite and burning metal, which were familiar companions of any battlefield, but something else. Something organic and fierce that made my nostrils flare. We touched down in what had once been a city. Now it was a maze of rubble and improvised fortifications. Dominion hover tanks lay scattered across the streets, but not destroyed in any way I recognized. Instead of the clean holes left by plasma weapons, these vehicles looked like they'd been torn apart by some massive predator. "Squad, form up," I called, falling automatically into my role as fire team leader. Advance by cover, watch for... I never finished that sentence. A figure emerged from behind a collapsed building, and my breath caught in my throat. It was roughly my size, but its form was all wrong. No scales, no natural armor plating, no visible claws or fangs. Instead, it was covered in some kind of artificial skin. Clothing, I realized, that was torn and stained with what looked suspiciously like Dominion blood. The creature raised one of its appendages, hands, not claws, in what I instinctively recognized as a peaceful gesture. When it spoke, the words came through a translation device clipped to its chest. "You're the reinforcements we called for." The voice was strange. No subsonic rumbles or harmonic frequencies like proper speech. Just simple sound waves carrying meaning. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my rifle trained on the being but not quite ready to fire. Something about its posture suggested it was exhausted rather than threatening. "My name is Sarah Chen," it replied, and I noticed that its eyes, completely unlike any I'd seen before, with no protective membranes or light-filtering structures, met mine directly. "Sergeant, Human Colonial Defense Force, 3rd Battalion." The word human hit me like a physical blow. Every warrior in the galaxy knew that name, even if most believed it was mythology. Humans were the first enemy, the species that had supposedly challenged the Dominion eons ago and been utterly annihilated for their presumption. Ancient texts spoke of a race so stubborn, so unreasonably aggressive, that the Dominion had been forced to completely sterilize their worlds to end the threat they posed. "Humans are extinct," Jorik stated flatly. The being that called itself Sarah Chen let out a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no humor in it.
Yeah, we get that a lot.
Problem is, nobody told us. She gestured behind her, and more figures emerged from the ruins. Dozens of them, all with the same impossible anatomy. Soft skin instead of armor, small teeth instead of fangs, hands instead of claws. They carried weapons I didn't recognize, crude-looking projectile throwers that seemed almost primitive compared to standard plasma weaponry. Yet they moved with the confidence of seasoned fighters. "The Dominion hit our colony 6 days ago," Sarah continued. "Standard extermination protocol, orbital bombardment, followed by ground forces to clean up survivors. Only they didn't count on us being quite as hard to kill as they expected. How many of you are there?" Commander Vextor's voice came through my comms system. He'd been monitoring our conversation from the transport. "On this world? About 1,200 civilians when they started. Maybe 300 of us left who can still fight." Sarah's voice carried a matter-of-fact tone that somehow made the numbers more chilling. "But we've been making them pay for every meter. Against how many Dominion forces? Started with about 5,000, down to maybe half that now." The mathematics were impossible. Even with superior technology and defensive advantages, no species could inflict those kinds of casualties while suffering such losses themselves. The Dominion soldiers were genetically engineered killing machines, bred for war and enhanced with the best cybernetic implants their civilization could produce. "Show me," I heard myself saying. Sarah Chen nodded and began leading us through the ruined city. As we moved, I started to notice details that my initial shock had caused me to miss. The improvised fortifications weren't just defensive positions, they were killing fields, designed with a brutally efficient understanding of how to channel enemy forces into overlapping fields of fire. The bodies scattered throughout the streets weren't just Dominion soldiers. They were Dominion elite units, their power armor cracked and broken in ways that suggested incredibly precise application of force. "How?" Yixalar asked, kneeling beside the corpse of a Dominion shock trooper. The creature's helmet had been removed, revealing the distinctive cybernetic implants that marked it as one of the enemy's most dangerous ground forces. Their armor is designed to withstand direct plasma cannon hits. Sarah knelt beside her and pointed to a small hole in the back of the trooper's neck, right at the junction where natural bone met artificial enhancement. "Armor's great for stopping energy weapons, not so good against a pointed piece of metal moving at 3,000 feet per second, especially if you know exactly where to aim." She held up one of the projectiles from her weapon, a simple metal cylinder that could have been forged by any industrial civilization. "We call them bullets. Been using them for about 800 years now." "But the energy expenditure," I protested. "To accelerate physical matter to those velocities requires enormous amounts of power." Sarah's mouth curved in what I was beginning to recognize as a smile, a facial expression that seemed to indicate either pleasure or predatory satisfaction. "About 40 grains of chemical explosive per shot. We make them ourselves from materials we mine locally. The implications hit me like a plasma bolt to the chest. While the rest of the galaxy had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons that required sophisticated power sources and complex manufacturing processes, humans had simply figured out how to make small explosions push pieces of metal really fast. It was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely terrifying in its effectiveness. We reached what Sarah called the downtown sector, where the heaviest fighting had taken place. The evidence of battle was unlike anything I'd seen before. Instead of the surgical destruction typical of modern warfare, this looked like the aftermath of some primordial struggle between titans. A Dominion mech unit lay on its side, its armored legs torn away at the joints. Nearby, a series of craters marked where someone had systematically destroyed an entire column of hover tanks, using what appeared to be improvised explosive devices. They adapt too quickly, Sarah was explaining to Commander Vextile, who had come down with the second wave of reinforcements. First day, we lost a lot of people because we tried to fight them conventionally. Energy weapons against energy shields, vehicle against vehicle. What changed? The commander asked. We remembered what we were good at. Sarah kicked at a piece of Dominion equipment, some kind of advanced sensor array that had been smashed beyond recognition. Humans don't fight fair, never have. When the enemy has better technology, you don't try to match them tech for tech. You make their advantages irrelevant. She led us to an intersection where several streets converged. The buildings on either side rose like canyon walls, and I could see positions where human fighters had clearly been stationed. Scorch marks on the walls showed where Dominion plasma fire had tried to dig them out. They sent a mechanized column down this street on day 3, Sarah continued. 12 hover tanks, 2 mech units, maybe 60 infantry. Beautiful formation, textbook urban assault tactics. What happened to them? Sarah pointed upward. Following her gesture, I saw cables strung between the buildings, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. We dropped the buildings on them. Instead of trying to punch through Dominion armor with superior firepower, the humans had simply changed the nature of the battlefield itself. The enemy's mobility and technological advantages meant nothing when several thousand tons of rubble fell on their heads. The Dominion protocols don't account for that kind of warfare, Commander Vextile mused. Their tactical algorithms assume rational actors following established military doctrine. That's their first mistake, Sarah replied, assuming we're rational. As if to emphasize her point, an explosion echoed from somewhere deeper in the city, not the clean detonation of a plasma charge, but the rough, dirty sound of chemical explosives. That'll be Marcus and his demo team, Sarah explained, checking the primitive timepiece strapped to her wrist. Right on schedule. Schedule for what? We've been herding the remaining Dominion forces toward the old industrial district for the past 2 days. Let them think they were pushing us back, consolidating our forces for a final stand. Sarah's smile became distinctly predatory. Reality is, we've been preparing a surprise for them. Another explosion, closer this time, then another. A pattern began to emerge. Not random detonations, but a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to drive the enemy in a specific direction. You're not fighting a defensive battle, I realized. You're fighting an offensive one disguised as a defense. Now you're getting it. Sarah shouldered her weapon. A design so simple it could have been built in any machine shop, yet clearly effective enough to kill some of the galaxy's most dangerous soldiers. The question is, are you here to help, or just to watch? I looked at my squad, seeing my own confusion reflected in their expressions. We'd come here expecting to find survivors in need of rescue. Instead, we'd found something that challenged every assumption I'd held about warfare, about civilization, about what was possible. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. And they were doing it with technology that any species could build, using tactics that any military could learn, applying a philosophy of warfare that was simultaneously ancient and revolutionary. We're here to help, I said finally. But first, I need to understand what we're helping with. Sarah Chen looked at me with those impossible, unprotected eyes, and for a moment I felt like she was seeing straight through to something I hadn't even known existed inside myself. We're here to win a war, she said simply. The question is whether you're ready to learn how. The sounds of battle grew closer, and I realized that whatever happened next would change everything I thought I knew about fighting, about winning, and about what it meant to never surrender. The humans had already died once, according to galactic history. Now I was about to learn what happened when the dead came back to teach the living how to fight. The industrial district had once been the heart of this colony's manufacturing sector. Now it looked like something from the nightmares of gods. Massive machinery lay twisted and broken. Pipes leaked unknown substances that created rainbow slicks across cracked concrete floors, and the air itself seemed to throb with barely contained violence. Sarah led our combined force through this maze of destruction with the confidence of someone who knew every shadow, every corner, every potential ambush point. Behind us, my squad and the other Zilani reinforcements moved with the careful precision of experienced warriors, but I could sense their unease. We were following tactics we didn't understand, trusting in strategies that defied our training. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing through a gap in a collapsed wall. The Dominion had indeed been herded exactly where the humans wanted them. Nearly 2,000 enemy soldiers filled what had once been the main assembly floor, their formations tight and professional despite the industrial debris scattered around them. Mech units provided heavy support while hover tanks guarded the perimeter. It was textbook siege warfare. Establish a secure position, fortify your flanks, prepare for the enemy's desperate final assault. "They think they have us trapped," Commander Vextal observed through the comm system. "They do," Sarah replied, and that predatory smile was back. "Problem is, they don't realize they trapped themselves too." She gestured to Marcus, the human she'd mentioned earlier. He was smaller than Sarah, with graying hair and hands that showed the calluses of someone who worked with tools and explosives. When he moved to join us, I noticed he carried no visible weapons, just a small device covered in switches and blinking lights. "Charges are all in place," Marcus reported. "Took us 3 days to hollow out the support pillars without them noticing, but we're ready to bring the whole place down." "The whole building?" I asked, horrified. The structure above us was enormous. Collapsing it would kill everything inside, enemy and ally alike. "Not the building," Sarah corrected. "The district." She led me to another vantage point, this one offering a wider view of the industrial complex. For the first time, I could see the full scope of what the humans had planned. The Dominion forces weren't just in one building. They were spread across nearly a dozen interconnected structures, all linked by elevated walkways and underground tunnels that had been designed to move materials efficiently between different manufacturing stages. "We've been placing charges for 4 days," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the calm satisfaction of a craftsman discussing his work. "Started with the structural supports, then moved to the utility lines. Gas mains, electrical conduits, chemical storage tanks. You're going to level the entire complex." Yixla breathed.
"We're going to make it disappear," Sarah corrected.
"Along with about 80% of the Dominion ground forces on this planet." The audacity of it staggered me. While conventional military thinking focused on engaging enemy forces directly, the humans had simply decided to eliminate the battlefield itself. Instead of trying to outfight superior technology, they were making technology irrelevant through the application of overwhelming environmental destruction. "What about collateral damage?" Commander Vextal asked. "Civilian casualties, infrastructure destruction, environmental impact?" "They glassed our cities from orbit. Killed our children in their schools, our elders in their homes, our families while they slept. The Dominion doesn't take prisoners, doesn't offer terms, doesn't show mercy." She checked her timepiece again. "Far as I'm concerned, anything that kills them faster is a net positive for the galaxy." I found myself studying the human woman with new understanding. Her casualness about violence wasn't sociopathic indifference. It was the cold pragmatism of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and decided that survival justified any action necessary to achieve it. 2 minutes, Marcus announced. "All units, final positions." Sarah broadcast on a frequency that reached both human and Zilani forces. "Remember, the goal isn't to fight them, it's to make sure none of them get out." My squad spread out along predetermined positions surrounding the industrial complex. The humans had planned this operation with meticulous care, accounting for every possible escape route, every potential failure point. Backup charges had backup charges. Alternative detonation methods were prepared in case the primary systems failed. Even the timing had been calculated to account for wind patterns that would disperse the debris in directions least likely to harm friendly forces. 30 seconds. Through my rifle's scope, I watched Dominion soldiers continuing their defensive preparations, completely unaware that death was literally built into the ground beneath their feet. Some of them were probably veterans of dozens of campaigns, genetically enhanced warriors with centuries of combat experience and the best military technology their civilization could provide. None of that mattered. 10 seconds. Marcus held up the detonation device, his thumb hovering over what I assumed was the primary trigger. Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder, not to stop him, but in a gesture of shared responsibility. 4, 3, 2. The world ended. The first explosions came from the deepest underground levels, a series of precisely timed detonations that severed every support structure simultaneously. For a moment that felt like eternity, the massive buildings seemed to hover in midair, defying gravity through sheer momentum. Then physics reasserted itself. The collapse was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Instead of falling straight down, the structures twisted and folded in on themselves, creating a cascade of destruction that seemed to feed on its own energy. Gas lines ruptured and ignited, adding pillars of flame to the chaos. Chemical storage tanks added their own contributions, clouds of toxic vapor that would make the wreckage uninhabitable for cycles to come. The sound was indescribable. Not just the thunder of falling metal and concrete, but something deeper, the death scream of an entire section of city being murdered with scientific precision. When the dust finally settled, nothing remained of the industrial district but a smoking crater filled with twisted debris. Nearly 2,000 Dominion soldiers had been erased from existence in less than 30 seconds, along with their vehicles, their equipment, and any hope of reinforcement. "Casualty report," Sarah called into her communication device. "Zero friendly losses," came the response from multiple human teams positioned around the perimeter. "Minimal debris impact outside the target zone. All escape routes were successfully interdicted." "Outstanding. All teams, begin Phase 2. I stared at the destruction, my mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. Phase 2. Mopping up. Sarah was already moving, her weapon ready, her expression businesslike. The explosion will have been visible from orbit. Any remaining Dominion forces on the planet will come to investigate, probably thinking their comrades were hit by some kind of orbital bombardment. And when they get here, we'll be waiting. The next several hours taught me lessons about warfare that no military academy could have provided. As Sarah had predicted, the remaining Dominion forces converged on the destruction site, their formations tight and professional, as they prepared to assess damage and search for survivors. The humans let them come. Hidden in positions prepared days in advance, human fighters waited until the enemy forces were completely committed to their investigation before opening fire. But this wasn't the chaotic firefight I expected. Instead, it was a methodical execution, with each shot carefully planned to maximize confusion and terror among the survivors. They targeted officers first, using those primitive projectile weapons to punch through energy shields that were designed to stop plasma bolts but couldn't adapt fast enough to deflect solid matter. Command structures collapsed as leaders fell to bullets fired from concealed positions hundreds of meters away. Then they targeted communication equipment, isolating units from each other and preventing coordinated responses. Soldiers trained to fight as part of integrated combined arms formations found themselves cut off, surrounded, facing enemies who seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. Finally, they targeted morale. "Psychological warfare," Sarah explained as we watched a Dominion squad break formation and run after their heavy weapon specialist was killed by a shot that seemed to come from nowhere. Fear is a force multiplier. Make them afraid and they'll defeat themselves. "But they're genetically conditioned against fear," I protested. "Dominion soldiers don't break." "Everyone breaks," Sarah replied with absolute certainty. "You just have to find the right pressure points." As if to prove her point, she raised her rifle and fired a single shot across nearly 400 meters of urban battlefield. A Dominion mech pilot fell dead in his cockpit, killed by a bullet that had found the one gap in his armor that no engineer had thought to protect. The remaining crew members of that mech unit abandoned their vehicle and fled. "How did you know?" I asked. "Know what? Where to shoot." That gap in the armor couldn't have been more than a few centimeters wide. Sarah looked at me with those impossible eyes, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Not hatred, not anger, but something far more dangerous. Absolute clinical understanding of how to kill efficiently. "We've been studying Dominion equipment for 3 years," she said. "Every battle, every engagement, every piece of wreckage we could get our hands on. We know their technology better than they do now." That's impossible. They have access to their own technical specifications, manufacturing data, design documents. They have access to what their technology is supposed to do. Sarah gestured toward the fleeing Dominion soldiers. "We know what it actually does." There's a difference. Over the following hours, I watched the systematic destruction of the remaining Dominion presence on Kepler, F442b. It wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. It was more like pest extermination. carried out with scientific precision and ruthless efficiency. The humans didn't just kill their enemies, they studied them first. Every engagement was simultaneously a combat operation and a research opportunity. They learned from every enemy reaction, catalogued every equipment failure, analyzed every tactical decision. Why? I finally asked Sarah as we moved through the aftermath of what had once been a Dominion forward operating base. You've already won. The planet is secure. Why continue studying them? Because this planet isn't the war, she replied. This is just one battle in a war that's been going on for 3 years, and we intend to win all of it. She led me to what had been the Dominion Command Center, now a smoking ruin filled with destroyed equipment and enemy corpses. Human technicians were carefully salvaging anything that looked intact, loading it onto improvised sleds for transport back to their own facilities. Every piece of their technology we capture makes us stronger, Sarah explained. Every tactical manual we recover teaches us how they think. Every communication intercept tells us where they're going next. You're reverse engineering their entire military doctrine. We're doing better than that. Sarah picked up a Dominion plasma rifle, examining it with the casual expertise of someone who had handled many such weapons. We're improving on it. She showed me modifications that human technicians had made to the captured weapon, changes so simple that any competent engineer could have implemented them, yet so effective that they doubled the rifle's rate of fire while reducing its power consumption. The Dominion designs their equipment for mass production and standardized maintenance, Sarah continued. Everything has to work across thousands of different worlds with hundreds of different species using it. That means compromises, built-in limitations, safety factors that reduce performance. And you don't have those constraints. We design everything to kill Dominion soldiers as efficiently as possible, nothing else. No compromises, no safety factors, no concern for anything except lethality.
Sarah's smile was cold as winter void.
Turns out that's a significant advantage. As the day wore on, I began to understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. They hadn't just survived a Dominion extermination attempt. They had turned it into a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that would benefit every subsequent engagement against the enemy. Every dead Dominion soldier represented not just a tactical victory, but a learning opportunity. Every captured piece of equipment would be disassembled, analyzed, and improved upon. Every intercepted communication would be decoded and used to predict enemy movements. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were systematically deconstructing their enemy's entire military machine and rebuilding it as a weapon pointed back at them. This is what you meant, I said to Sarah as evening approached and the last enemy resistance was eliminated. When you said you were here to win a war, you're starting to understand. She looked out over the battlefield, where human salvage teams continued their methodical collection of enemy equipment. The Dominion has been winning for centuries because they're stronger, faster, better equipped than anyone they fight. But they've never fought anyone who learns faster than they adapt.
Sarah turned those terrible, impossible eyes toward me again.
They've never fought humans. As we prepared to evacuate the liberated colony, I found myself changed in ways I couldn't fully articulate. The humans had shown me something that no amount of training or experience could have taught. That superiority wasn't just about having better weapons or stronger armor, or more advanced technology. True superiority came from the willingness to do whatever was necessary to win, combined with the intelligence to figure out exactly what that was. The humans were terrifying, not because they were stronger than their enemies, but because they were smarter, more adaptable, and absolutely ruthless in their application of both advantages. And now they were teaching those lessons to the rest of us. 6 months later, I stood in the command center of the resistance cruiser Defiant Hope, watching holographic displays that showed the current state of what the humans had begun calling the real war. The transformation had been so complete, so fundamental, that I sometimes struggled to remember the warrior I had been before Kepler. 442b. The being looking back at me from polished surfaces was still Zolani, still carried the scars of 100 battles, still possessed the same physical capabilities I'd been born with. But something essential had changed in those depths that Sarah Chen had looked into with her impossible eyes, something that made me more dangerous than I had ever imagined possible. Kethvar, report from Sector 7, called Lieutenant Harris, one of the human officers who had joined our integrated command structure. The ease with which different species now work together would have been unthinkable before humanity's resurrection. But desperation and success had a way of breaking down old barriers. I turned to the tactical display, where new information was streaming in from our reconnaissance networks. What I saw there made my secondary heart skip in rhythm. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. Dominion fleet elements 17 through 23 are moving toward the Proxima system, I announced to the mixed species command staff. Intelligence suggests they're planning a major offensive against the colonial worlds there. How many ships? Asked Commander Vextel, who had adapted to human tactical methods with the same enthusiasm he'd once shown for traditional Zelani warfare. Approximately 800 vessels. 4 dreadnoughts, 26 heavy cruisers, the rest destroyers and support craft. A year ago, such numbers would have represented an unstoppable force. The Dominion's technological advantages meant that even their smallest ships could outfight anything the Resistance could field. Traditional thinking would have counseled retreat, evacuation of the threatened worlds, acceptance of another devastating loss. But traditional thinking was a luxury we could no longer afford. Sarah, I called to the human tactical coordinator, who had become something like a mentor to me over the past months. What's our response? Sarah Chen looked older now, her hair showing streaks of premature grey that spoke to the stress of coordinating resistance operations across dozens of star systems. But her eyes still held that same terrible clarity, that absolute certainty in her ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. We give them what they want, she said simply. The command center fell silent. Even after months of working with humans, their tactical decisions still had the power to surprise us. Explain, Commander Vextel requested. Sarah moved to the main holographic display, her fingers dancing across the control interface to bring up new data overlays. The Dominion is committing nearly a quarter of their total fleet strength to this offensive. That represents the largest concentration of enemy forces we've seen since the war began, which makes it incredibly dangerous, I pointed out, and incredibly vulnerable. Sarah highlighted supply lines stretching back toward Dominion territory, logistical networks that would be required to maintain such a massive force far from their primary bases. They can't sustain this level of deployment for more than a few weeks. Win or lose, they'll have to pull back after that to avoid critical supply shortages. So, we wait for them to exhaust themselves? We help them exhaust themselves faster. Sarah's smile was becoming familiar to everyone in the command center. Predatory, calculating, and absolutely confident. Then we destroy them while they're weakened. Over the next hour, she outlined a plan that was simultaneously elegant and terrifying in its scope. Instead of trying to match the Dominion fleet in direct combat, we would use their own tactical doctrines against them. Every species in the galaxy knew that Dominion forces relied heavily on local resource exploitation to maintain extended operations. They would strip mine asteroids for raw materials, harvest atmospheric gases for fuel, commandeer civilian infrastructure for logistics support. What if those resources weren't available? Sarah asked. They'd have to fall back on their supply lines, I realized, which we'll be systematically destroying behind them as they advance. The plan that emerged was more than ambitious, it was revolutionary. Instead of fighting the Dominion fleet directly, we would fight the conditions that allowed it to operate. Asteroid mining facilities would suffer unfortunate accidents that rendered them unusable. Atmospheric processing stations would develop critical malfunctions at precisely the wrong moments. Civilian infrastructure would be evacuated and destroyed before enemy forces could utilize it. Scorched Earth, Sarah called it, using a term from human military history that needed no translation. Deny them everything they need to maintain their offensive capability.
But that will require coordination across dozens of systems. Commander Vextel protested.
Hundreds of separate operations, all timed to support a single strategic objective. Yes, Sarah agreed. It will. The next 3 weeks tested every lesson I had learned about human approaches to warfare. Sarah's plan required not just military coordination, but the cooperation of civilian populations, industrial facilities, and governmental structures across multiple star systems. It demanded precise timing, flawless communication, and the willingness of entire worlds to sacrifice their economic infrastructure for strategic advantage. I found myself commanding a mixed task force of Zelani warriors, human special operations teams, and volunteers from half a dozen other species, all working toward objectives that individually seemed insignificant but collectively would reshape the balance of power in our sector. My team's assignment was typical of the operation's scope. Infiltrate the Altair 7 mining complex, plant charges that would render the facility unusable, and extract before Dominion forces arrived to claim it. Simple in concept, but requiring the kind of precision planning and flawless execution that had become humanity's signature. Remember, I told my squad as we approached the target in a stolen Dominion transport, we're not here to cause random destruction. Every charge has been calculated to damage critical systems while leaving the basic infrastructure intact for post-war reconstruction. Jorik, who had grown considerably in skill and confidence since our first encounter with humans, checked his equipment with the methodical precision Sarah's people had taught us all. What if we encounter resistance? We avoid it if possible, eliminate it if necessary, but the primary objective takes precedence over everything else. I felt the words coming from some deeper place than conscious thought, a level where human tactical philosophy had merged with Zalani warrior instincts to create something new. The Dominion can replace soldiers. They can't replace 6 months of lost mining operations. The insertion went flawlessly. Human-designed infiltration techniques had proven remarkably effective against Dominion security systems, primarily because they relied more on patience and careful observation than on sophisticated technology.
Instead of trying to hack electronic locks, we simply watched guard patrols until we understood their patterns, then moved through gaps in their coverage.
Instead of attempting to defeat sensor networks, we studied them until we knew exactly where their blind spots were located. The mining complex was vast, a testament to Dominion industrial efficiency. Massive machines carved through asteroid rock with mechanical precision, while automated systems sorted and processed the extracted materials. Under normal circumstances, this facility could supply raw materials for dozens of capital ships. We made sure those wouldn't be normal circumstances. The charges we placed were marvels of human engineering. Small enough to hide in equipment housings, sophisticated enough to remain undetected by Dominion security sweeps, but powerful enough to destroy critical components throughout the facility. More importantly, they were designed to create cascading failures that would make repairs impossible without completely rebuilding major systems. Charges set, Yixala reported from her position near the main ore processing center. When these go off, it'll take them months to get this place operational again. Same here, came reports from the other team members spread throughout the complex. Primary fusion reactor control systems are compromised. Main conveyor network is wired for destruction. Communications array will be completely severed. I checked the timing device Sarah had provided, a piece of human technology that was crude by Dominion standards, but absolutely reliable in its function. Extraction in 30 minutes. Everyone to the rendezvous point. The withdrawal was as smooth as the insertion had been. We departed the mining complex with no indication that our presence had been detected, leaving behind what appeared to be a perfectly normal industrial facility. The Dominion forces that would arrive in a few days would find everything exactly as they expected it, right up until Sarah's charges detonated. Similar operations were taking place across dozens of star systems, all coordinated to deny the approaching Dominion fleet the resources it needed to maintain its offensive capability. Fuel depots suffered containment failures. Repair facilities experienced power grid collapses. Supply caches were evacuated and destroyed by their own personnel before enemy forces could claim them. The Dominion fleet advanced exactly as their tactical doctrines dictated, expecting to live off the land as they had in countless previous campaigns. What they found instead was a landscape stripped of everything they needed to survive. Phase 1 complete, Sarah reported, as we gathered in the Defiant Hope's command center to watch the results of our coordinated sabotage. Dominion forces are now operating entirely on their internal reserves. The main display showed the enemy fleet's advance slowing as supply shortages began to affect their operational tempo. Ships that should have been pressing forward at maximum speed were instead conserving fuel, reducing their energy signatures to preserve power for essential systems.
How long before they have to retreat? Commander Vextal asked.
At current consumption rates, maybe 10 days before critical shortages forced them to withdraw. And Phase 2? Sarah's smile was becoming more familiar but no less terrifying. We don't let them withdraw. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming any of us survived to establish military academies. Instead of engaging the Dominion fleet directly, we attacked their supply lines while they were fully committed to their offensive operations. The enemy had planned for resistance from the colonial worlds they were attacking. They had prepared for ambushes from hidden resistance fleets. They had even anticipated the possibility of reinforcements arriving from other sectors. What they hadn't prepared for was having their own supply convoys systematically annihilated while they were too far from home to retreat without refueling. I found myself commanding a squadron of improvised attack craft, each one built from captured Dominion technology but modified according to human design principles. The ships were fast, maneuverable, and absolutely expendable, qualities that traditional military thinking would have considered problematic but that human tactical doctrine treated as advantages. Remember, I broadcast to my pilots as we prepared to intercept another enemy supply convoy. We're not trying to win a fair fight, we're trying to destroy their cargo before they can defend it. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. Our ships swept in from multiple vectors, ignored the convoy escorts entirely, and focused all their firepower on the transport vessels carrying fuel and ammunition. By the time the Dominion defenders could organize an effective response, their supplies were already burning wreckage scattered across several million cubic kilometers of space. Convoy destroyed, I reported back to the Defiant Hope. Estimated loss of supplies sufficient to maintain 3 capital ships for 2 weeks.
Outstanding.
Sarah's voice came back through the communication system.
Return to base for refit and rearmament.
We have 14 more supply convoys to intercept before their main fleet runs out of options. The mathematics of the campaign were beautiful in their simplicity. The Dominion fleet required approximately 50,000 tons of supplies per day to maintain full operational status. By destroying their supply lines while they were committed to offensive operations too far from their bases to retreat easily, we were forcing them to choose between strategic defeat and tactical annihilation. They chose tactical annihilation. The final battle took place in the Proxima system, where the Dominion fleet made its last desperate attempt to capture enough resources to fuel their retreat. What they found waiting for them was every resistance ship we could muster, supported by defensive installations that had been secretly reinforced over the past months, all coordinated by tactical doctrine that treated their technological superiority as irrelevant. All ships, remember your targeting priorities, I broadcast to the resistance fleet as we prepared to engage. Ignore their main guns, ignore their armor. Target their fuel lines, their ammunition storage, their life support systems. Make them choose between fighting us and staying alive. The battle that followed wasn't the clean, decisive engagement that military historians would probably prefer. Instead, it was a confused, chaotic melee where traditional advantages mattered less than adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to accept casualties in exchange for strategic objectives. Human-designed attack craft swarmed through gaps in Dominion formations like predatory insects, too small and fast for capital ship weapons to target effectively, but armed with precisely the right weapons to exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy designs. Resistance capital ships, many of them captured and modified Dominion vessels, used tactics that no proper military academy would have taught. Ramming attacks, suicide runs, deliberate overloads of their own power systems to create massive explosions in close proximity to enemy ships. And through it all, Sarah Chen's tactical coordination held our chaotic swarm of different species and ship types together with the kind of precise timing that made individual sacrifices add up to collective victory. Dominion flagship is breaking off, reported one of our reconnaissance ships. They're trying to retreat. Let them go, Sarah ordered, her voice carrying the calm satisfaction of someone whose plan had succeeded exactly as intended. They don't have enough fuel to make it home. In the end, the Great Dominion offensive that was supposed to break the back of colonial resistance lasted exactly 18 days. The fleet that had begun with 800 ships limped away with less than 200, most of those critically short on fuel, ammunition, and crew. More importantly, they left behind nearly 600 vessels that resistance forces could salvage, study, and turn into weapons for the next phase of the war. Casualty report, Sarah requested as the last enemy ships disappeared beyond sensor range. 43 resistance vessels lost or critically damaged, came the response. Estimated crew losses around 1,200 personnel. Dominion losses? 600 ships destroyed or captured. Estimated crew losses around 150,000. I found myself staring at those numbers, trying to process their implications. In a single campaign, we had achieved casualty ratios that should have been impossible, not just unlikely, but physically impossible given the technological disparities involved. How? I asked Sarah, as we watched salvage crews beginning their work on the captured enemy vessels. By changing the rules, she replied. The Dominion is used to fighting species that try to match them strength for strength, technology for technology. They have doctrines, protocols, established responses for every conventional threat. But we're not conventional. We're not even trying to be conventional. Sarah gestured toward the battlefield, where human technicians were already beginning the process of analyzing and improving captured Dominion equipment. We're trying to win. Everything else is secondary. As I stood in the command center of what had once been a Dominion dreadnought but was now the flagship of an increasingly powerful resistance fleet, I realized that Sarah had been right about more than just tactics. The war really had reshaped me, but not in the way I had expected. I had thought that learning to fight beside humans would make me more brutal, more willing to accept terrible costs for strategic objectives. Instead, It had made me more precise, more thoughtful, more capable of seeing solutions where others saw only problems. The humans hadn't taught me to be more violent. They had taught me to be more intelligent about violence. They had shown me that true strength wasn't about having the biggest weapons or the strongest armor or the most advanced technology. True strength came from the willingness to adapt faster than your enemies could respond, to learn more from failures than they learned from successes, and to never ever accept defeat as final. The Dominion had tried to wipe out humanity once, and they had thought they succeeded. They had been wrong about that, just as they had been wrong about so many other things. Now, as resistance fleets built from captured enemy technology, prepared for the next phase of a war that was rapidly spreading beyond their ability to control, I understood why Sarah Chen had smiled when she told me that humans had been declared extinct. The dead, it turned out, made excellent teachers for those still learning how to fight. War's terror reshaped me when I fought beside humanity. HFY Sci-Fi Stories.